In this interview, I speak with Julia Eve, the founder of C Spiral Tarot. Hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Very good. Nice to meet you finally. So, to get started with the interview, I wanted to ask you if you are familiar with a podcast called the Telepathy Tapes.
Oh, yes. I consumed the whole thing um, over the course of a weekend, like a month or two ago. A little bit after it had come out, but as soon as I started listening to it, yes, I listened to the whole thing. I've actually been listening to some of the episodes they've been releasing since then. Obviously, you're quite familiar with it.
I am familiar with it, yes. And in fact, it inspired this issue. And I think, our issue is focused on how to unlock the hidden potentials of being
Yeah.
human. I've talked to a couple of people so far in this vein, and
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting what I'm hearing. Because the question is, okay, so if you listen to the telepathy tapes, which you have, the evidence is overwhelming for these telepathic capacities in autistic children. And so one of the questions that remains is, how is that possible? Because according to our scientific conception of the world, that shouldn't be possible, which is why they're having such a hard time getting any official recognition for something that seems to be so obviously true. And I wanted to speak to you about it because I see a lot of parallels, at least in terms of possible explanations, possible worldviews that can help
Yeah.
make things like telepathy more palatable, plausible, understandable if we
Mm-hmm.
look at experiences that are also fairly common, the somewhat, certainly unusual capacity of tarot cards seemingly
Mm-hmm.
to give us information beyond what we see. So that's kind of my premise for our interview.
Oh, I love that. Oh, that's great. When I listened to the tape, obviously I could not help but think of all the many parallels between how I see the world, how I try to understand the world, how I use the cards, how I do my practice. It's all very interconnected, and there were so many really interesting things that came out from those episodes and what the kids said and what the parents said. And I thought, oh my God, it rings so true to my experience, even if we can't properly, I don't know, measure it, prove it. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. I mean, I was fascinated by the tapes. Obviously, I don't know how I couldn't be given what I do. So, yeah,
Right.
I'm really happy to talk about that. Yeah.
And so, since you've already been thinking about it, what do you see as the kind of main parallel between the what's happening with the autistic children in the telepathy tapes and what you experience as a tarot reader and using the cards?
I think the experience is different in some sense that clearly what's happening with these children is much more intensified than maybe what I'm experiencing. And I think part of that probably has to do with the fact that I am so in this world in a way that, at least how it was described in the tapes, they're maybe not feeling as in the world as in the body. But regardless of that, it's like this knowing that there's something else. So the way it was described in the tape, their knowing comes from like a very experiential place. They're living it, they're breathing it. That is what their experience is. So they wouldn't question it, right? That's their reality. But for me, it's a little more faith driven, right? Because I'm not living in that space all the time, but I believe in it so much. And if I didn't believe in it so much, I wouldn't be engaging with the tools that I engage in, and I wouldn't have the worldview that I did. And so I think a lot of it is just that understanding, whether you can prove it or not, and whether you're living it all the time or not, that there is something else. There's something else going on. And that's a really interesting thing. And when I'm tapping into that field, whether in my day to day, whether in my dreams, whether with the cards, you're pulling back things that feel outside of the realm of what is considered normal. So, it's hard for me to say exactly what the parallels might be, not knowing fully what their experience is or being in their experience. But to me, it's like tapping into that space that you can't quantify. I think that's happening in both realms, with me, with cards, with what people like me do, and with the children that were in the tape. Like you're going to a different place on some level, whether that place is within, whether it's without, like whatever. It's hard to exactly say what it is or where it is. And I think those are like not like misnomer questions anyway. It's not probably anywhere or anything. It's something else, but it's that like, you just know that there's this other thing going on around you. So for me, it's like I'm always trying to dip into that. And it was remarkable hearing their stories, because it's like, okay, they're in it like all the time. They're in it much more than what I experienced. And anyway, it's incredibly interesting. Yeah, I think it's the same thing. I don't know why or how, but I think it's like a very similar thing, if not the same thing, just experienced in different ways.
So you're what you're describing as living in that space. You've said that space a few times, and I'm curious about that space. I think some of the ways that it has been spoken about, and one of the terms I like the most for that space comes from a French Islamic scholar of a century ago, the Imaginal realm, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a
Mm-hmm.
realm in which of symbolic wisdom.
Yeah.
And I just spoke with a professor at Rice University named Jeffrey Kripal, and he was
Mm-hmm.
explaining to me a philosophy called dual aspect monism. In that particular philosophy, reality is recognized to be an undifferentiated wholeness, which defies the possibility of any understanding, because any understanding would have to exist independent and separate from wholeness. So reality starts as an undifferentiated wholeness of potential and possibility, but anything that we are able to experience or understand comes from a dualistic
Yeah.
experience of self and
Yeah.
other. And so the process by which that wholeness communicates itself in this world of experience, what Jeffrey was saying is, because he studies paranormal and mystical experiences, and he's saying these experiences are ways in which this underlying unity is trying to communicate itself to us. And what it's mainly trying to do is get us to question our current worldview and open to
Mm-hmm.
something bigger. And I
Mm.
love how he put it. And I would love to hear you kind of relate that to your own thoughts and your own experience.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly relevant. I mean, I think that's what it all boils down to, right? Like we have this reality that we come into, and we think we understand it, sort of, or at least we're given some frameworks with which to navigate it. And I think like we have these experiences, or at least for myself, you have these experiences through life, and oftentimes they start in childhood, and I think they kind of, dissipate from there. But we come into this like, okay, wait, there's something else going on here. These like question marks start coming up about the reality that we're living in. And it's like it feels like something is trying to get in. Something is trying to slowly sift you out of what is considered this normal worldview that we're all participating in. And I think obviously it's here for a reason. I think that, we're given this experience for a reason, but I think also through my work, my practice, the things that I often think about, it's like we're supposed to be here and do that and live that, but at the same time, not forget what else there is, or find our way back to it. And I think tarot is, at least for me, my channel, my pathway of choice. And I think you could use any tool, anything you're interested in, I think you could use as a pathway back to that unity beyond the dualism, beyond this world of form, whatever, however you want to describe it. But I think the most important thing is not so much like what the tool is, but how it speaks to you and how it inspires you. And I think that, for some people, that medium is going to be art, writing, creativity in some way, shape, or form. Some deep interest will get you there. but it's like being open to it. And I think for me, that thing is tarot, and that has always been tarot, whatever it is that, inspires you. And that's what it is for me. It connects me to that remembrance that there is that unity, that something else, that something greater. Like, words don't really describe it too well, but it's like I know it by its feeling.
Beautiful. And I can see from what you've said so far that the telepathy tapes fascinated you because you saw that those children were living in that experience of unity, or at least much closer
Yeah.
to that experience of unity,
Yeah.
probably because they are less entranced by the world of the familiar.
That's what I took from it as well. Exactly. Yeah. It's just, obviously we can't say what it is or what it isn't. I don't know. I don't claim to know anything for certain, but so much of what they said in those tapes just rang so true on like a deep level for myself. I think that's how we come to know truth anyway, by just like how it feels in our body when we hear it. And there was a point in, I forget what episode that it was. I think it was Houston, and his mom was sort of questioning him about what he was saying and almost suggesting like, are you lying? Is this even true? And he said something, and it has stuck with me since, because it was just like, okay, that's it right there. And he said something to the effect of, you don't get these kinds of gifts if you lie. And I thought, yes, to get these sorts of gifts, you have to be transparent. You have to be pure and honest and true. So part of it is like, that's part of how it works. That's part of why it works. And that's part of also probably what keeps us from it. There was that whole idea of like, who can come to the hill and who cannot come to the hill. And it's not so much like picking and choosing people based on any attribute other than just what they choose to be honest about and how they choose to, like their energy, perhaps, that honesty within them. So in a sense, you kind of choose for yourself, I think, in that way, whether you can receive these gifts or not. No one keeps you out of it. I think we're our own gatekeepers in that sense. But yeah, it's so interesting.
Now, you and I first connected because you wrote to me after you read my book, Higher Self-Expression.
No, it was the Cosmic Consciousness book.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Have you read
I
this
did read
book?
that, though. I did read Higher Self-Expression as
Okay.
well.
So
But it
you
was
read
after
the Path of Cosmic Consciousness first.
yes, yes.
Oh,
That was my first
interesting.
introduction to your work. And I had come to it because, I was a big fan of Buck's Cosmic Consciousness. And when I read that, it just explained so much to me. It just illuminated so much for me. And I also obviously saw a lot of parallels between it and tarot and those experiences and all that stuff. But I was also curious to know what people today were writing about. Cosmic consciousness, very specifically, like that term, really speaks to me. So I was looking for people who are writing specifically about that term, like as opposed to maybe like super consciousness or a transcendent state or whatever. I was very interested in that particular term. So I was like, who modern writing about this? And that's how I found your book. And that's what I read first. And then I reached it.
So yes, and I guess in that book, The Path of Cosmic Consciousness, I see cosmic consciousness as one way of describing that space that you've been talking, the
Yeah,
space we've been
absolutely.
talking about,
For sure.
right?
Yeah.
That was Edward Carpenter's term for that. And I see that as kind of the closest one can get to the absolute unity, right? The unity of the divine is unknowable. So when you get
Yeah.
almost, just touching up against that, you have this wide open,
Yes.
practically almost unified consciousness, but not entirely, because there's still some experience there that's at least a
Right.
hair's
Yeah.
breadth separate from the
Yeah.
unity.
Yeah.
And so in higher self-expression, which I started to get interested in the tarot around the time I was writing higher self-expression, because I started to see it, and this is along the lines of things I read in P.D. Ouspensky's Symbolism of
Oh,
the
yeah.
Tarot, which
Yep. That's great. Yeah.
in his introduction, he basically talks about how the tarot requires I see if I can find the exact quote, but he says it requires the development of a kind of a certain kind of awareness. He called it a special cast of mind. And I was very
Mm-hmm.
fascinated, because for him, he wasn't really a tarot reader per se,
Yeah,
but his feeling was that the tarot offered one of the best ways of developing that special cast of mind, that which I
totally.
see as related to what I wrote about in Higher Self Expression from Ralph Waldo Emerson when he spoke about how you interpret the symbols of the world, that everything that you can experience is symbolic of a deeper underlying reality. And that's how I see that the tarot cards, I'll tell you my little history with the tarot. I've gotten interested in the last 10 years again. I first picked up a tarot deck 30 years ago. I was living in a spiritual community at the time, and we had a shoe rack, and the top shelf of the shoe rack was a lost and found rack.
Mm.
And there was a little tarot deck, and it had the book with it. So someone had left it. And I thought, oh, I had never picked up a tarot deck before. So I picked up the deck. I said, I'll just try this. And I pulled a card and read the
Mm-hmm.
description, and it was so freaky accurate to the question that
Yeah,
I had,
yeah.
that I literally put it down and I didn't touch another tarot deck for 20 years. I just,
Oh,
I just,
wow. Oh, that's
I just
funny.
had this feeling that I don't know what's going on with those cards, but that's
Mm-hmm.
weird. Like I said, 10 years ago, I have some friends who are tarot readers, and I got more interested in symbolic knowledge and
Yeah.
creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I would love to know more about your experience of reading tarot. How long have you been reading tarot?
So, yeah, I have kind of a similar in the sense that like it's not really super linear. Like I started, I dropped it, picked it back up, and it's for me also. It's really been in the last 10 years that it has really exploded for me. But I was first drawn to tarot really young. I don't know why. I don't remember where I saw it or what like fascinated me. I have no idea. I don't have recollection of this. But I was 11 when I got my first deck, and it was a honestly a deck I had no business reading. It was just way like way beyond what I was going to understand at 11. But I was just so fascinated by it. I tried so hard to understand what the book was saying, to understand the meanings, to try to figure it out. And that experience was really interesting to me, and it stuck with me. Even though you're 11, how much life experience do you even have to add to this tool? I didn't have much. So put it down for a bit, picked it back up in my teens, put it back down through my whole 20s basically. And then it wasn't until 2014 that I came back to it after ignoring it for a very long time. And it was just a period in my life where spiritually things were expanding and shifting for me, and I felt the call back. And I've been working very intensely with it since then.
And what is your experience when you actually do a reading? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so do you tend to use the Rider Waite, the traditional cards?
I use them now the most. I didn't always. It certainly didn't start that way. My first deck was a deck called the Servants of the Light. Certainly not a deck for 11-year-olds nor tarot beginners. I would never recommend it, but I don't know. That's one that I bought. But now I work primarily with the Rider Waite Smith, and that is because it's just come to be extremely meaningful to me, this deck. And I recognize how deeply intentional every piece of it is. And it speaks to me because of that, and the symbolism and the depth with which it was created and presented, and all of that. But yeah, so now primarily with the Rider Waite Smith I work with, yeah.
So I have a friend. Her name is Judith Marsden. She's also a tarot reader, and I'm continually amazed in various work that I have done with her or seen her do, just the spontaneous way in which she looks at the card and pulls out meaning that feels incredibly relevant. And it relates to the card, but obviously it relates to something beyond the card. And I'm fascinated because I'm just going to read this passage from Ouspensky,
Yeah.
right? It
Mm-hmm.
says, there are many methods for developing the sense of symbols in those who are striving to understand the hidden forces of nature and man, and for teaching the fundamental principles as well as the elements of the esoteric language. The most synthetic and one of the most interesting of these methods is the tarot. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I want to know when you are reading cards or anyone is reading cards. Like, I can see you're looking at that, the symbolism of that card, and it's not a normal mental thing. You're not going, okay, that's the symbol of the card, this is what it means, and then you're relating it somehow. You're entering into what I would call an in-between state where you are
Yeah.
allowing that card and the symbolism on it to communicate directly something to you that's beyond what's in the card itself.
Well, I think that's what's so fascinating about the cards, because every single one, if you think about, and I think where a lot of tarot readers get frustrated in the process of learning, because I think there's this idea that once you memorize what the cards mean, like if that's like, I don't know how you anyway, if you memorize what the cards mean, then you will be able to read the cards. But it is not like that. When you enter into the space of actually reading a card, you're like convening with the moment. Like, you are entering the moment, and every single moment is different. So in one particular moment, but you have to be open, right? You have to go into the space sort of open and curious and receptive, and with the intention that this is what we're doing. And then in that moment, you're allowing that card to speak what it wants to speak of all the ways that it could speak. So I think of the cards sometimes as like these like past thought forms. There is so much that one could say, endless amounts that one card could say, let alone many cards together. So it's really in that moment that you enter that you are going to decide, based on intuition, your gut, what's coming to you, what's coming to your mind, what's coming to all your senses, what of all the possibilities that exists within this card is going to come to the forefront. And it is rather spontaneous. And I think it requires, equal doses of intuition and reason. I think both are important to bring to that space.
There's a spiritual teacher no longer alive named Richard Rose, and he coined a great phrase that I love called betweenness. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, there's many different ways you could think about it, but essentially, it's between. The main way he described it is you have a incredibly strong intention at the same
Yep.
time that you have a complete openness to possibility. So, and he calls that the space of magic. So in this case, it's like you intend to gain the wisdom of the card. You have a very strong intention to gain that wisdom, but you are completely open as to how that's going to show up. And then you're in the place where magic happens.
That's it. That's exactly it. I would agree with that for sure.
That corresponds to your experience.
Oh yeah, 100%. For sure. So you really do. I mean, if you go into a reading, and I get the best results from readings where I am really curious about the answer, but at the same time, I'm not super like concerned about the outcome. I've got a healthy dose of detachment coming into it as well, but curious. But you don't want to be indifferent going into a reading either.
Right.
In most cases, I think that fascination, that awe, that curiosity, that is a really important ingredient to getting to that like magic spot for sure.
Right. And I have used the term to explain that mechanism that you're describing. I've used the term creative illumination,
Mm-hmm.
which implies that something is being illuminated to you, but you are playing some creative process in the illuminating process. It's not just it's not passive illumination. You're not just sitting there utterly passive being given information. You are creatively engaging with the possibility of wisdom in ways that help bring that wisdom into manifestation. So that it's a creative tarot reading. I would assume I would assume you would agree, is a creative endeavor. That's
It
why
is
they
a
call them
very
mystical
creative
arts.
endeavor. It's my creative endeavor of choice. I mean, creativity can obviously manifest in all number of ways, but tarot reading is definitely a creative act, and not just the reading the tarot, but contemplating the tarot, meditating with the tarot, studying the tarot, writing about the tarot, which I do a lot. Like, that to me is how, that's my creation. That's my way of creating. And I think anytime we're inspired by something, to the extent that I feel inspired by tarot, that we are entering that space of creation.
That's beautiful. So this is what I consider to be the rub. This is the crux point of both the telepathy tapes and the tarot. So then there are many things that fall into this category: mystical experiences, paranormal experiences, UFO experiences, the telepathy of autistic children, right? They all fall into the category of seemingly not possible under our current scientific worldview, and therefore dismissed. If we start to describe it the way you and I are right now, as this kind of higher creative endeavor, that's how I described it in higher self-expression, right? You're entering into this space of betweenness, and you're allowing, and it doesn't just have to be tarot, right? It can be any circumstance in the world. You could just, I know, you can look at a tree in a certain way, and you can let the tree tell you things about yourself, about whatever it's like anything can act as a portal to that unified wisdom. And it is a creative endeavor. So there is an aspect in which you are needing to engage with it. You're needing to creatively pull the wisdom out in a certain way. As soon as you explain that to a scientifically materialistic world, they say, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. You're making it up." And you say, "No, it's not making it up." Right? This is what Henri Corbin was so strong about in terms of the imaginal realm. It's a realm. It's a non-physical realm, and so in that sense, imaginal. But it is not imaginative or fantastical. It's real, but it's not material, and that's what is difficult. This is why I got so freaked out by the card, because it was clearly real. And in your head, because you're trying to protect yourself against the possibility that there could be some wisdom, something that knows me better than me on the other side of that card. And so to protect yourself, you go, well, my subconscious probably made it up. Why? Because we don't want to give any credit for agency or knowing to anything besides human beings, basically. And so I want you to speak to that, because when you are reading tarot, you've got someone sitting in front of you. There's some context probably for that reading. You're pulling the card, you're entering into that space of the moment, and you are seeing something real there. What is your experience of that?
God, it's so hard to put that to words. It feels like something clicks. It feels like, oh, yes, this is it. Like an aha, like an epiphany, like something is fitting perfectly, like it's clicking. There's that inner surety where, and I think about what it means sometimes to know something for sure. So I do this. I used to do this exercise sometimes to understand this space better, where I would play with the idea of, like, what is it to know something for sure? What is that feeling, as opposed to a feeling of maybe? So, like, if I, for example, here I've got the Fool in front of me, right? So if I turn this card around, so I cannot see the Fool, and I ask myself, what is the card that's underneath here? What is this card? And I know it's the Fool. And I go, okay, what does that feel like to know something for sure? I know for sure this is the Fool. As opposed to, I speculate this is whatever the other card that I have here that I could pull, that I don't know what it is. And the difference between that subtle difference between being pretty sure and being absolutely sure about something, really feeling that knowing. And sometimes, not always, but there are often times when I am doing readings where I'm hitting on some piece of information that feels like that knowing. And that's how I recognize it, as a knowing. Different from a speculating, different from a probably. It just feels like, oh, yes, this is exactly what it is. It's so hard to exactly explain what that is, or what that feels like, or what the experience of it is, but it feels quick too. It feels like very sudden, like something coming together. I don't know, like explain it, like how that feels, and it's sudden and it's sure, and it doesn't always work that way. It doesn't always feel that way, but when it does, it's like that.
Yes, and I can relate to that in terms of when I write
Mm-hmm.
books, because writing for me is that kind of creative process. It happens very much in some state of direct connection, and then there's a kind of knowing that comes in the moment. And I'm sure there's a certainty that this is, yes, this is true, this is true, this is true. But often at the end of writing a session, or if I go back to writing my books, there's large sections of the book when I was in some kind of flow state with something that I have no memory of writing it.
Yep.
There's other parts which Jeff was writing, right? And often those are the
Mm-hmm.
parts that help connect the dots between the other parts. But then there's long passages, I would say probably the majority of the book, which I don't remember. It wasn't knowledge coming from Jeff. It was knowledge flowing through Jeff from beyond. And that's what the book Higher Self Expression is about. It starts with automatic writing and how that was developed. And I would see automatic writing is a way of essentially channeling information from that higher unified space. Reading
Yep.
tarot is another way of channeling that kind of information. Now, the interesting thing, the thing I'm fascinated by with the tarot is, as you said, especially if you're using the traditional Rider-Waite deck, it is packed with symbolism that
Mm-hmm.
has the encoded wisdom of the Western esoteric tradition from nobody
Yep.
exactly knows how long ago, but it's rich
Mm-hmm.
with symbolic meaning.
Yes. So I think it's designed in that sense to, if you are open and if you are receptive and if you are inspired and you're coming at it with the right intention and everything is aligning perfectly, that those teachings will come out for you and it will speak to you because it's been designed to do that.
Yes. And Ouspensky called it the most complete code of the Hermetic symbolism we possess. And that fascinated me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in the Hermetic tradition, that kind of ancient Western occult tradition. And at least for Ouspensky, he feels like the tarot has the most complete wisdom of that tradition encoded in it. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or obviously those who are able to read the cards to see that wisdom, and it becomes kind of like I think of the tarot as a lens. You can look through it and see everything differently. You see, it's like you're looking at the world in three dimensions, and then you look through the lens of the tarot, and four more dimensions become available to you of reality that you couldn't see without it.
Well, it's really interesting because it's one of those things that reveals itself also over time. Not often is it the experience that the first time you pick up a tarot deck, you're going to go, oh, like this is what it's really saying. Um, I mean, sometimes maybe that is the case. I don't, I can't speak for everyone, but for myself, like I had no idea when I was first pulled to it that there was that encoded in it. There was that level of symbolism. It's not something that would have been apparent to me. And it wasn't until years and years of working with it that it started to open up those other dimensions. And I go, oh my God, okay, there's a whole other thing happening here. This is not just what I thought it was. I mean, it's always been interesting to me. It's always fascinated me. It's always all those things. But okay, now I think I know why. I think I know why I've always been so drawn to this. And I think maybe it's in Higher Self-Expression. I don't remember what book exactly, but you talk about this idea of like coming back to material. I think you write about this in Higher Self-Expression, coming back to the same book. When you come back to things, they aren't the same. Because you're
Yes.
not the same. And I think tarot works much in that same way, right? It can only meet us where we're at. So where we are in our development, where we are in our understanding, our worldview, whatever, all those things, where we are, it meets us there. So me as 11 coming to it, as eager as I was not ready for that information. I wasn't ready as a teen. I wasn't ready in my 20s. And I wasn't ready when I came back to it in 2014. But eventually I became ready. And it was there waiting for me when that time came. And I'm grateful that I stuck it out to that point, because now I see what I'm really doing with the cards, whereas before I don't know that I was as clear.
That's fascinating, you know, because the wisdom that comes out is a combination of the wisdom in the symbolism and our ability to connect with that wisdom. And
Right.
that changes over time. Now, you have you have Spiral C Tarot, which is
Mm-hmm.
well, it's the guise under which you do tarot readings. Spiral C
Mm-hmm.
Tarot. I'm
Yeah.
just curious. I've wondered ever since I knew that that was the name of your work. Why Spiral C?
Yeah, that's a good question, because honestly, I don't think I could have even answered that when I first put that together in, what year would it have been? 2015, I think, probably when I put that together. And you know, I can say at that time, I don't know. I think there was a reason that I put those two things together with tarot, and but to come up with an answer now, I almost have to like reverse engineer it, because I had an
Mm.
answer at the time. I thought it sounded right, and I liked the idea of the symbols, and I was very drawn to the water element. But now that I think about it, and as I've thought about it over the years, what I really think is interesting about tarot is that when I'm working with it, and what I think it can do for us is help us tap into different things, both below and above. So I think of tarot as being a mechanism to channel information from the subconscious, but also from the superconscious, and that us being sort of the conductors between those two spaces. And when we enter into a reading or whatever, that we are potentially pulling information from both of those places. And I often equate symbolically like the sea, the ocean, the depth of that with the subconscious. And I often think of space as being more related to the superconscious realm, cosmic consciousness, and the spiral and the galaxies and all of those things. So I think about those two sort of opposing forces and how we meet in the center of them, pulling from each and arriving at the message, whatever that message might be.
Oh, that's amazing. Now, I also know that you, besides doing readings, you teach people to read the cards.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I think
eh,
that's my favorite part of it, actually.
oh, well, I am intending to do a session with you on that. Um,
Okay, awesome. Would
I
love
wanted to
that.
speak to you first because I didn't want
Mm-hmm.
that session to influence this interview. But tell me about that. What's that about? You know, because lots of people want to get a tarot reading. They have a problem in their life, or they have a circumstance, and they want someone who knows how to read
Mm-hmm.
those cards. But
Mm-hmm.
why is it, for instance, your favorite thing to do to teach people to read the tarot?
I think because I'm just so passionate about this tool, and I know what it has done for me. Um, not just the information it gives me when I read it, but what it has done for me personally, developmentally, spiritually, like life changing stuff. I know what this tool can do for people. And I am so passionate about helping people connect with it in a way that is meaningful and potentially even like life changing for them. It really depends. People have different reasons for coming to tarot, and depending on what those reasons are, I may or may not be the right mentor or whatever for you. And so there's a bit of a process of trying to understand what someone's needs are and what they're trying to get from the tool. but I tend to work with people who are, looking to go a little deeper with it, trying to maybe not just like understand how to read for others, but how to really get to the depth of it and figure out, what it can do for them in other ways. But yeah, like with one-on-one sessions, we're really fine tuning that to whatever the individual's needs are, and yeah, like
So
what
in,
they want to get from it.
in my case, similar to what I read in Ouspensky, my interest is in using the tarot to develop what I call mystical vision. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that deeper vision beyond the familiar, and to learn how to more efficiently and effectively navigate that sense of inner knowing, which
Yeah.
I feel like I have a lot of experience with that in terms of my spiritual practice of meditation, and in terms of the experiences I have. A lot of what happens for me in that is this kind of movement from knowing to knowing to knowing to knowing, which
Mm-hmm.
seems to take me deeper and deeper and deeper into mystical revelation. And I would like to learn how I want to transfer that capacity to the tarot, to the cards, so that I can explore, in meditation, I explore the inner realms of revelation,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm very curious to explore the symbolic wisdom of the tarot, not
Mm-hmm.
as a learning process. I mean, I do have a lot. I have accumulated a number of books on the tarot, and I find them
Yeah.
fascinating. But I don't want to just learn about it. I want to learn from
Yeah.
it. I want to be inside that
Yeah.
world of wisdom that the tarot is a
Mm.
doorway to.
Yeah. That's what's fascinating to me as well. It is truly something you can step into. I really look at it as like something of a map, both a map to our like mundane, regular lives, but also a map to our soul's journey and our spiritual evolution. I think that there are things encoded in here that, understanding the symbols can tell you something, but also really deeply integrating that and seeing how that plays out in our lives, in our psyches, in our hearts, in all the places within us. It really brings it to life, and you go, oh, like that's what it's talking about. You have those experiences where you're just out and you go, oh, that's what the high priestess is saying.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. So, in concluding our interview today, so I listen to the telepathy tapes, and I think the world. I really wish the world would open more deeply
Mm.
to things beyond our current knowing. What would your message be about the tarot, and your hopes for what the tarot could potentially bring to the world?
I like to meet people where they are, and I know that it's asking a lot of people to make these leaps of faith. I don't like to push people before they're ready, and I think that when the time is right, these things will find them, or they'll find these things. The only thing I ask of people is just to keep a bit of an open mind, the possibilities, and to just become more curious and even questioning of their own experiences in their reality, tarot aside. You know, it's a funny thing that happens to us every night. For example, where we go quote unquote unconscious and have these weird dreams and experiences. It's like even just getting curious about those sorts of things, which we all experience, right? And opening our minds up to, okay, if that can exist, then maybe there's something going on with tarot too. Maybe there's something else going on. There must be something else going on. But I think you're so right. I think that we protect ourselves, and I think that protection is thick. Um, and I do it too. Like, there are still times where I'll be engaging in these things and I'll have like kind of freaked out by that, and it must have been this, or it must have been, try to rationalize it, right? And so I don't like to put. I know that's not what you're suggesting, but I don't like to put things on people. I don't care if people are interested in it or believe in it or not. My faith is so strong that um, that it's okay one way or another. I too wish that, we were collectively more open to these things. I think we'll get there. I think it is a learning and a growing thing for us collectively. And I think I think we'll get there.